Hakadosh Boker or Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Nuntet Amud Aleph 59a1 says the Gemara. Vehadinin kum va'asehu v'kachashi. He says 1 second. We asked that 1 second if it's going to be that a goy is going to be shavat, or that we said that also if he's going to learn Torah. But if it's going to be goy shavat, he's going to be chayav mitah. So why didn't we bring this down to do with Sheva Mitzvah ben Noach? What does that mean? Just like the Sheva Mitzvah ben Noach, if he doesn't fulfill them, he'll be killed. So answer the Gemara, ki kachashi sheval taseh, kum va'aseh lo kachashi. So he said, what about dinin? Dinin is kum va'aseh, meaning they have to come and they have to do, right, dinim. And it was brought down dinim. Meaning, what's the difference between dinim and, right, and what's the difference between dinim and the concept of goyishe Shabbat? So answers the Gemara, kum aseh v'sheval taseh ninu. He says dinim is also mitzvah taseh, but it's also you have to do, right, sheval taseh, which means you have to put a bedin to do the mishpat, but it's also a lo taseh, which is telling them that lo la'asot avel, that they cannot come and do iniquity in their judgment. So therefore it's going to be both of them together. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, oveh kochavim shosek b'torah hayav mitah. So this was a second mitzvah. You remember yesterday, right, which was going to be today's daf. We were talking about goy Shabbat. And now we're doing tomorrow's daf, and now we're learning goy shilamad Torah. So therefore, there are only two mitzvot. That was the yisod of the Rav Chida. There are two mitzvot that if the goyim do it, they are killed. Chayav mitah. Why? Because it only applies to banim shel makom, to the children of Hashem, and not to the servants of Hashem. They can do any mitzvah, but they cannot do goy sheshavat or goy shema that was learning Torah. So he says, why? It says, Torah tzivelanu Moshe morasha velo lahem. It's for us and not for them. So ask the Gemara, v'lichashva gabe sheva mitzvot. So he says, so 1 second, why is it then that you have to learn it? Why the sheva mitzvot ben Enoch also the same thing? You should have learned it. So answers the Gemara, man de amar morasha, the one that learns that it's going to be a morasha, migzal kagazila. It's like he's gozel the Torah from Israel by learning the Torah. And therefore, since he comes and he says it's like gezel, so therefore that's why you don't have to learn it. But that's already gezel. He's stealing it from us. But according to the mandamar that comes and it says that it's meorasa, right, which means that we're not reading it as morasha, we're learning it at kilu, it's meorasa, that we are meurasim to the Torah, but this is the meureset of, this is our fiance, right? There's our fiance. So therefore he says, dino kenara meurasa, which is again, mesekila. Which means that it doesn't matter how you read the pasuk, whether it's Torah tzivelanu Moshe morasha, that it's a morasha. So if they stole a morasha, if it's meorasa, morasha is like an inheritance, right? If you say it's meorasa, it means that it's engaged us. And if therefore if they come and they learn the Torah, it's ki'ilu that he's going to be baal, not a meorasa, and therefore they get, right, sekila. So matevates are going to come and they're going to ask the following question. Rabbi used to come and used to say, how do you know that even if you're going to have an Ovet Kochavim, but he's being Osek B'Torah, he's fitting to be, you have to give him respect like a Kohen Gadol. שנאמר אשר יעשה אותם האדם וחי בהם. כהנים לוויים וישראל לא נאמר את האדם. הלמדת שאפילו אוהב כוכבים ועושה בתורה הוא לכהן גדול. Right? What's going on? Right? Here, you have to ממש, מכבד אותו כמו כהן גדול. What's going on? So here it says that you're allowed to. Answers the Gemara, the Sheva Mitzvot didhu. No, we're talking about that the Oved Kochavim is learning the Sheva Mitzvot ben Noach. So if he comes and he's learning the Sheva Mitzvot ben Noach the way that he's supposed to, so therefore that he's like going to have to be mechabed to just like a Kohen Gadol. Reb Chanina ben Gamliel, it says, Af Adam min achai. You remember we were speaking about ever min achai. It's not only just ever min achai, also Hadam min achai. We're in the two dots, yeah? So Tan Rabbanan, we learned to the Braita. Ach basar benafsho. Damo lo tochelu. What does that mean? Basar benafsho damo lo tochelu. Ze ever min achai. So when it says in the pasuk that you cannot come and you cannot have it, so that's ever min achai, the limbs. So you can't have a limb of a living animal. So he says v'chanin gamliel omer af adam min achai. Even the dam min achai is also going to be the same thing. So ask the Gemara, my tama de Chanin Gamliel. What's the reasoning of Chanin Gamliel? Kari Bey, because he says basar benafsho lo tochel, damo benafsho lo tochel. Meaning he holds that there's two separate isurim. One isur is basar benafsho, which basically is ever minachai, and another one is benafsho, damo benafsho, which means the dam. The Rabbanan, but according to the Tanakama, the Braita, so he says, what does he do? What does he do with the word damo? Because at the end of the day, he does say damo. So he says, "Haul lemishra shratzim hudata." That word of damo is coming to come and teach you that that a ben Noach is going to be able to permit to eat ever from a sheretz chai, right? That's why it says about damo benafsho. Okay, which that's what they're learning. Benafsho damo. So he says it's only going to be of a balchai, which damo is chelek mi besaro, right? Which means the blood is part of the neshama. Kayotze bedavar ata omer, he says, just like you see, rak chazak levilti achol adam ki adam hu hanafesh. What does that mean? Lo tochal hanefesh im basar. So the pasuk says, and then it says that a person should strengthen himself not to eat the dam. So when the same thing here, he says that when it says, right, rak chazak levilti achol adam is actually going to be the eved minachai. Okay, and then when it says ki adamu anafesh, that's the dam minachai. That's what they keep on saying. But the chachamim that they argue on Chanin Gamliel, they actually hold that it was not prohibited, right, to Yisrael because of the chayuto behema. So Rabbanan, hahu ledama kaza sheneshama yotzet ba'udata. He says, according to the chachamim, we're talking about the blood which is coming out of the behema when it's live. Meaning, when you have an animal and you took out blood, meaning you bloodlet from an animal, right? So it's a sur for Yisrael to eat it because of dam. So he says, but it has to be, right, only dam shaneshama yotzet bo. So here, if it's not going to be dam shaneshama yotzet bo, because again, it's a kazat dam, so therefore it should be permitted, because it's not dam meaning it wasn't that now it died and now you're having the blood. Here it's not like that. So says the Gemara, Lama michtav livnei Noach, lemishne b'Sinai. He says, why is it that the Torah had to prohibit every minachai to bnei Noach? So therefore, why afterwards did we have to be commanded on Har Sinai? So answers the Gemara, meaning that if it's already prohibited to bnei Noach, so why do we need to write it? Right? There are certain things, whether it's every minachai, so why do we have to come and make it that it's going to be also prohibited in Har Sinai if it's already prohibited to bnei Noach? So he says, meaning if we were before Har Sinai, we were Ben Noach, so we were already prohibited on every minachai. So why do we have to obligate it again? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, Kol mitzvah sheneemra livnei Noach v'nishnet b'Sinai leze v'leze neemra. Any mitzvah which was written, right, which was said to Bnei Noach, and then afterwards again repeated in Har Sinai, it was for both of them, also for Bnei Noach and also for Yisrael. But if there was going to be a mitzvah which was for Bnei Noach, and it was not repeated in Har Sinai, Yisrael neemar, right? It was only for Yisrael, not Bnei Noach. Ve'anu en lanu ela gida nasheh. So for us, it's only gida nasheh, because the gida nasheh was the only duguma, right, of the yisur of gida nasheh, v'libad Rabbi Yehuda, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, right? Which means that's what he says over here after the story of Yaakov and his children. It says al ken lo yuchlu bnei Yisrael et gida nasheh. So according to Shtat Rabbi Yehuda, this was already prohibited, right? The gida nasheh of Baalei Chaim. So for since before Matan Torah it was already considered Bnei Noach, right? This mitzvah, right, which was said to Bnei Noach, and then it wasn't taught again in Sinai, so therefore it was only going to be for Bnei Israel, okay, and not for Bnei Noach. However, according to Chachamim, they argue in Rabbi Yehuda, right, it was not prohibited for Bnei Yaakov during the time of that time to eat Gida Nasheh. So the Yisur, right, was only the first time was only brought down in Har Sinai, and that's when he actually wrote it during the time when it occurred. Meaning the Yisur was only given at Har Sinai. But where did he write the Yisur? When the story took place, right? So therefore, even though the Yisur was not given then, the Yisur was only given on Har Sinai according to Shitat Chachamim. So according to that, it comes out that if right now, there's going to be a prohibition only given on Har Sinai, which means the prohibition to Gida Nasheh, according to Chachamim, was only on Har Sinai, not on during the time of Bnei Noach. So therefore, when the Torah wrote it wrote it in the proper place when the story took place. So it comes out that a regular Bnei Noach, there's no Yisur to Gida Nasheh. The Yisur of Gida Nasheh was only to Bnei Israel, right, and not to Bnei Noach. So says the Gemara, Amar Mor, Kol mitzvah shneemar livnei Noach v'nishne b'Sinai, leze v'leze neemra. So now it comes out like this. We just said different klalim. The first one is brought down, right? The first one is going to be brought down, that it's going to be Kol mitzvah shneemra livnei Noach v'nishne b'Sinai, leze v'leze neemra. So therefore, it's going to be given for both of them. So that means why? Because if it was taught again in Har Sinai, why do you have digital? What are you telling me again? What, a broken record? Telling me again? No, because Be'emet, it's going to be for both. So says the Gemara, the opposite. If it's taught in Sinai, It's only for Yisrael, not for Bnei Noach. So answers the Gemara, Midi itni avoda kochavim b'Sinai, ve'ashkechan da'ana shovdei kochavim milava. He says, 1 second, the Yisur of Avodah Zarah was taught in Sinai. And we know that a goy that does Avodah Zarah is going to be punished. So therefore, Shema Mina Lezevil, meaning like this, if you're going to tell me a svara, the logic, that if it was given to Bnei Noach and then given on Har Sinai, it's only for the Jews. So what about Avodah Zarah? The first two mitzvot, positive commandment, negative commandment. Anochi Hashem Lokecha, right? And lo yeh lecha Elohim acharim al panai. So now, if you're going to tell me now that this applies only to Jews and not to non-Jews, a goy that does avodah zarah is not chayav. Now we know that's not true. A goy that does avodah zarah is going to be killed. So therefore, obviously, shema minah has to be lezev lezenemra. Okay. Now we'll go to the other klal. What happens if it was only brought down for Bnei Noach and it wasn't taught in Har Sinai, right? Or Israel, right? And not Bnei Noach. So he says, Adraba, midelo nishnem b'Sinai. If it wasn't taught in Har Sinai, it's only for Bnei Noach. It's not for Israel. So answers the Gemara, leka midam del Israel shari velo oved kochavim asur. He says what? There's nothing that for Israel is mutar and for Bnei Noach is asur. Meaning, according to you, it comes out that automatically, whatever is going to be for Israel, right, it doesn't exist that it should be permitted for Israel and asur for a non-Jew. So says the Gemara, velo, but Yifat Toar. What about Yifat Toar? Yifat Toar, right, is asur for Ben Noach. It's only permitted for a Yisrael. Meaning, right, we learned this on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, that it said that it's going to be asur for Ben Noach and mutar Yisrael. So it's only permission, it's only a ter for Bnei Yisrael to do Yifat Toar. Yeah, Nun Zayin. Yeah, so he says, Hatam mishum delav b'nei kivush ninu. He says, no, the reason why over there, it's because they don't have the mitzvah of kivush, it's only Yisrael. And therefore, it's going to be permitted for Yisrael during the time of a war, when they're doing kivush, so they're allowed to come and they're allowed to lichvosh also the Yifat Toar. And therefore, Mimila, they're allowed to take the Yifat Toar. That's the only reason why I meant, why is it permitted for a Jew and prohibited for a Goy? But we just found something that for a Jew it's permitted, and for a Goy it's prohibited. So therefore, what are you telling me that Ki'ilu, from the fact that it was written in Sinai, it's only for Goy and not for Bnei Noach, right? So he says, oh, that's the way it should be. But he says, why? Because you think that there's nothing that's going to be prohibited? So says the Gemara, this somebody asked us yesterday. I forgot his name, the one that was sitting right here. He asked us yesterday, you have Shaveh Pruta. What does that mean? We know that it's a sur for Ben Noach and it's mutar for Yisrael. What does that mean? If right now a Jew steals Shaveh Pruta, he's going to be chayav. If it's less than Shaveh Pruta, he's not going to be chayav. For a goy, even less than Shaveh Pruta is going to be asur. So the question is, right, what's going on? So he says, Hatam mishum delav b'nei mechila ninu. There, the reason why is because they're not b'nei mechila. What does that mean? They don't mochel. And the fact that they're not going to be mochel even on less than a Shaveh Pruta, that's why it's asur by Ben Noach. Meaning, mitzat svara bemet, it should have been permitted, just like a Jew is permitted. Right? Less than a Shaveh Pruta, half a penny, you're going to be makpid on a penny. But the fact that we are usually mochlim and they are not, that's why it was permitted for us and prohibited for them. So let's go back to the original klal, the original general rule. Kol mitzvah shneimru lebnei Noach v'nishner b'Sinai. Any mitzvah which was given for Bnei Noach, right? We just quoted you, right? Any mitzvah which was brought down for Bnei Noach and taught, right? B'Sinai, lezeh v'lezeh ne'emra. So it was given to everybody, right? Milah. Milah was given by Bnei Noach because it says it by, right, Avraham Avinu. So it says, Vare milah shenemra li Bnei Noach, dichtiv v'atad b'ritit l'shmor, v'nishnet b'Sinai, u'vayom hashemini yimol b'sarulato. L'Yisrael ne'emar, right, v'lo li Bnei Noach. So therefore he comes and he says, Hahu lemisha Shabbat udata. Meaning, when it was brought down on Har Sinai, it was coming to permit you to do Brit Milah on Shabbat. Right? He says, and that's hinted in the word bayom. Right? Why? When it says bayom uvayom hashmini, he says vafilu b'Shabbat, because since it's going to come out the 8th day, what happens when it comes out on Shabbat? On Shabbat, you're not allowed to inflict the wound. Right? You're not allowed to come in to be chovel. Right? So therefore, why? Why are you allowed to? Because of the day where it says bayom hashmini, when it says on the 8th day that it's including Shabbat. So it says the Gemara Pidyav Rivya. Pidyav Rivya was given to Bnei Noach, right? Because it says vatem prurvu v'nishne b'Sinai, and again it was taught on Har Sinai. Lechem olahem shuvu lachem lo lachem. So he says still Yisrael ne'emra Velo livnei Noach. It's only for Yisrael. It's not for Bnei Noach. They don't have the mitzvah. So answers the Gemara, Hahu lechol davar shenitam b'minyan, tzarich minyan achel la'atir hu data. What does that mean? Anytime that you're going to be given something with a minyan, you need a completely different minyan to permit it, right? Which means mitzvah pediya v'yivya is not considered a mitzvah which was taught in Sinai, right? And he says, which means that it wasn't to command them on pediya v'yivya, it was to permit them coming and taking their wives, right? Because their wives became prohibited to them 3 days before Har Sinai. Now, even though the eter is mashma that listen, it's only for 3 days, right? Al tigeshu elisha was only written for 3 days, right? But, and therefore mashma, the right afterwards you could, but you still needed a minyan acher to permit them. So when it comes and it says shuvu lachem laolechem, it wasn't a new command on pidya v'rivya. It was basically only going to be that, by the way, you were just prohibited to your wife for 3 days before Matan Torah. Now you're permitted to go back to her. Right? That's what the Torah is teaching us. So says the Gemara, if so, kol chada v'chada nami. So he says, 1 second, every single mitzvah ben Noach, you could also say the same thing. What does that mean? Right? Neima mishum milta itne. What does that mean? He says, maybe it's going to be because of, right, that it was brought down in Sinai, so every single detail is an extra mitzvah. So says the Gemara, Hachi Kamar. This is what it means to say. Azhara miaderu mitnaba lamali. Why is it that the Torah had to come and bring back this azhara, right, on the Isurin that was already brought down? We could have just learned, right, the extra little detail. Meaning, if you're coming to tell me a new detail, just tell me the detail. And I already know there was a mitzvah already given down. Why do we have to repeat the entire mitzvah again? So he says, right, and therefore he comes and he says, the fact that it was actually taught again in Sinai, we learned that the Yisur is noeg, whether it's going to be for Bnei Noach or also for Yisrael. So says the Gemara, so then the only dugma that we really have then, right, is going to be, because we had the question against whether it's going to be Brit Milah, Pidya V'Rivya, that it's not considered that it was taught again in Sinai. That means every single one was brought for its own chidush, but it's not that it was taught again on Sinai. So he says, so it comes out then that the only one is going to be Gidan Hashem. According to Rabbi Yehuda, right? So therefore it comes out that these two mitzvot, right, which is going to be Milyan Pidya V'Rivya, were also given to Bnei Noach and also not wasn't taught in Sinai, right? But again, remember, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right, it comes out that there was a machloket according to Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they were already prohibited during the time of, right, Yaakov Avinu to prohibit because it was Bnei Noach also was prohibited. But according to Chachamim, they were permitted to have Gida Nashe. It was only Moshe Rabbeinu that commanded it, and then they just put it in the parasha of Yaakov Avinu. But really, Be'emet, it was permitted until then. So he says, "Ve'en lanu ala Gida Nashe bilvav Rabbi Yehuda. Hanami lo itni." But we didn't see Milah and Pidya V'Rivya. So says the Gemara, "Ha'itni l'shum milta be'alma halo itni klal." He says these mitzvot were still taught for what? To add something on. We already said Brit Milah was to add on the Bayom HaShemini, that even on Shabbat, right? And the Pidya V'Rivya was also to add on that it was permitted to go back to your wives after Matan Torah, because if not, you would have been prohibited to go back to your wife. So therefore, it comes out that the other ones, which is going to be Gidan Hashem, was not permitted whatsoever. Okay. Ibaitema, another answer. Mila mi kara leAvrahamu dekam misal rechmana. Brit Milah was not given to Bnei Noach. Brit Milah was only given to Avraham Avinu. So he says, because it says, "Ve'ata beriti tishmon, ata v'zeracha acharecha ledorotam, ata v'zeracha im inishachrin elo." We had a mistake. We thought that 1 second, Pidya V'Rivya, Milah, and Gidan Hashem, they're all before Matan Torah, correct? They're in Sefer Bereshit, meaning if you open up the Chinuch in Bereshit, you're going to have already in Parashat Noach, you're going to have the Prurvu, you're going to have in Parashat, how do you call this? In Parashat Lech Lecha, you're going to have Brit Milah, and then you're going to have later on, you're going to have the Parashat of Gidan Hashem. So you have 3 mitzvot brought down even before Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, right, Rosh Chodesh. So you have 3 mitzvot. Now, I thought that all of them were Bnei Noach. And then we kept on asking, were they repeated or not repeated? And the Nafkamina, are we commanded it only, or is it also for them? All of a sudden now, says the Gemara, whoever told you that Milah was to Bnei Noach? Milah was only given to Avraham Avinu. And it's Vata. No. Ve'ata et briti tishmon, ata v'zaracha acharecha ledorotam. Avraham Avinu was a Ben Noach, just like every other Ben Noach, but it was only given to Avraham and his chain down, not to other Bnei Noachs. Remember, Bnei Noach means you have Noach, and Noach was the father of everybody else. Because Adam Rishon, once there was Noach, so Noach became the continuation, even though it's all Bnei Adam also. Right? But everyone comes from Adam Rishon, but everyone comes from Noach. When Noach comes, right? It's going to come out that it's going to come this concept of Bnei Noach. So it only applies to Avraham. So says the Gemara, we are on Tetam Bet. Says the Gemara, right? If we're talking about now that the Brit Milah is only going to be for Avraham Avinu and the first children, and not for all Bnei Noach, Ele Me'ata Bnei Yishmael Lechayvu. So Bnei Yishmael should also be chayvim in Milah, even after Matan Torah. Why? Yishmael was the son of Avraham Avinu. So answers the Gemara, Ki bi Yitzchak yikare lechazara. Since it's written mefurash only Yitzchak yikare lechazara, that means Yishmael is not the zera of Avraham. That means even though it's a physical child of Avraham Avinu, but he's not considered the child of Avraham Avinu, and therefore he's not chayav in Brit Milah. They do it anyway, but it's not that they're obligated in it. Says the Gemara, Bnei Esav lechayvu. Okay, Bnei Esav. Why? Esav comes from Yaakov. Yaakov comes from Yitzchak. And so therefore it should be obligated. So says the Gemara, Yitzchak velo kol Yitzchak. When it says ki be Yitzchak yikare lechazara, be Yitzchak is in Yitzchak, but not all of Yitzchak. So there's going to be part of Yitzchak, which means exactly that Yishmael is not going to be, not Yishmael, Esav is not going to be included. Matkif la Rav Oshaya, says Rav Oshaya, Ela me'ata afterwards. Ela me'ata, he comes and he says, Bnei keturah lo l'chayvu. What about Bnei keturah? Remember that now you had other children of Avraham Avinu. Who are the other children of Avraham Avinu? Bnei keturah. So says the Gemara, Ha'amar Rabbi Yosef bar Avin, v'item Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. Some people say Rabbi Yosef bar Avin or Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. Eberiti hefar is l'rabot bnei keturah. When it comes and it says eberiti hefar, we're learning from here that it's including bnei keturah in the mitzvah of Milah. What does that mean exactly? Here it says that since Beriti Efar is extra, because it says Varel Zachar Shelu Yibon Tzalol Tov Nichatan V'Shem Yimei. So therefore, since it's extra, it's coming to be mechayev Avraham lamulet kol banav. Who's kol banav? Even bnei keturah, right? But not their children. So bnei keturah, yes. Their children, no. Okay. So according to this, okay, there's a whole thing here in the footnote. Exactly what does that mean? Fine. So says the Gemara, right? He says Amar of Yudamarav says of Yudamarav. Adam Rishon lo utar lo basar la'achila. Do you know that Adam Rishon was not permitted for him to eat basar? Tichtiv, as it says in pasuk, lachem yeh leochla ulchol chayat haaretz. What does that mean? Ulchol chayat velo chayat haaretz lachem. When it says lachem yeh leochla ulchol chayat haaretz, it doesn't say velo, right? Not chayat haaretz for you. Ushebao Bnei Noach, when Bnei Noach came, that was hitel lahem basar. Why? Shneimar ki yerek kesef natati lachem et kol. What does that mean? Now you're able to eat everything just like yerek kesef. So yachol lo yeh ever min hachai noeg bo. So maybe you're allowed to eat every min hachai. Meaning, just like until now, he had to be a vegetarian and he wasn't able to eat, right? He wasn't able to eat the meaning the meat, right? Only the vegetables, right? The yerek kesef. So therefore, I would say also that there's no problem of ever min hachai. Right, which means that no, he's not allowed to eat ever min hachai. So yachol after shratzim. I would say that also the yisur of shratzim. Tamulomar ach. When it says ach, shratzim is not part of the yisur of ever min hachai. We mentioned this many times already, right? That ever min hachai does not include shratzim. That's what they learn from the word of ach. Umay talmuda says the Gemara. Why do you need it right from here? Right, you have it already from Damo. So Ravuna says Damo mish Damo chaluk mi besaro yatsu shratzim shen damam chaluk mi betzarim. Remember that there's going to be a difference between a sheretz and between an animal. The animal, the blood of the animal, it's like a human being, which means that the blood is part of the basar of the animal. When we're talking about a sheretz, it's not. Okay, so he comes and he says like this. He says Meitvei urdu bidgatayam. 1 second. It says by a damarishon urdu bidgatayam. My love lachilem. We're not talking about that you're allowed to eat it. So therefore, you see from here that they were allowed to come and to kill the fish. So he says no lemlacha, only for melacha, not for eating. So says the Gemara, the dagim min melachani. Well, you could do melacha with fish. I could understand you could do melacha with animals, but you can't do melacha with fish. So what does it mean urdu bidgatayam? So he says, in yes, like Rachva. Why? To buy Rachva, hinhig beiza v'shibuta mai. He says, what happens right now if you came and you were manhig a karon? That means you're riding a karosa, chariot, with an ez or a min dag. It's a shibuta. What is the halacha? Which means that we know that you're not allowed, mina Torah, to put a shor and a chamor together, but it's two different animals. What about two different fish, two different species of fish? What's going to be the halacha? You're allowed to or not? So you have two different fish. Imagine they're going to be in the sea, and they're riding you. They're attached the reins to your chariot. Or is that allowed to or not? So tashema uvofa shamayim. What does that mean? Urgu. It said there in the pasuk, right? So says the Gemara, the fact that from this question that you see that there's different fish that it's ra'ui lemelacha, you see that be'emet it was not permitted for him to eat the fish. It was only permitted to him to do melacha in the fish. How do you see they could do melacha? The two different, yeah, fine, yeah, tashema. Uv'ov hashamayim. Ma'elav la'achila. He says, what? We're not talking about na'achila? Says, we're not, no, melacha. The ofot b'nei melacha. He says, what? Ofot is b'nei melacha? So he says, in yes. How do we know the birds could do melacha? Because by Rabbi Huna, dashba vazim targolin, according to Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, what's halacha? Meaning, from the fact that you could say that you could thresh with an avaz and a tarnegol, and these are types of birds, so therefore it comes out that you could do melacha with birds. So another question then, tashema uvchol chaya romeset al haaretz. What does it mean now? So he says, he says there it's going to be including the nachash. The Tanya was learned in a Braita b'Shimon ben Asiya Omer, Chaval al shamash gadol shava min haolam. Chaval that we lost a big shamash. Why? Shilmalenu nitkalel nachash. כל אחד ואחד מישראל היו מזמנים לו שני נחשים טובים. אחד משגרו לצפון ואחד משגרו לדרום. להביא לו סמבולים. בית טובים ואבנים טובות ומרגליות. Imagine, the nechashim could have been mamash our servants. So imagine every single Jew could take two nechashim. They're going to be his servants. He's going to send one to the north. They're going to get him beautiful stones and this. Velo, not only that. Mafshilin retzua tachat znovo. They used to come and put a retzua under his zanav, right? Umotzi ba'afar leginato l'churbato. And then they're going to get, right, afar for all his everything that he needs. And it says urdu v'chol chaya romeset, which means that now Adam Rishon is going to be sholet also on the nechashim for melacha. Right, but he wasn't able to eat the meat. Meaning that don't think when it says urdu, that means you're going to rule them. It means that you could eat them and you could do whatever you want. No, no, no. Only for milacha. So matevei. So we're going to ask another question. Do you know why the nachash did what he did? Jealousy. What was he jealous of? He saw that Adam Rishon was in Gan Eden. The Malachai Sharet were his chefs, so they were roasting him meat, right? They were doing sinun on the yain so he could drink good wine, right? What happened? The Nachash went, he looked at him, and he started having kina. So because of that, he did the entire thing. So says the Gemara, now 1 second. There it's written that they were tzolin lo basar. That means he was eating meat. So what's going on? Answers the Gemara, hatam bebasar yoreh min hashamayim. It's artificial meat that they're making now in Israel. Yeah, it's not real meat, right? It was mina shamayim, so therefore it wasn't real meat. So says the Gemara, "Miika basar." What is there basar? And so yeah, yes. Ki hadar b'Shimon ben Chalafta havekazil beorcha pagubo hanach ar yivata. Right, davu kana melape. He found these arayot that they were coming, right? That they were screaming against him, right? Amari says hakefirim shoagim lataref. Right? We say hakefirim shoagim lataref. What does that mean? They came down from Shamayim to Yerechaim Basar, Chada Achlua, the Chada Shavkua. One of them, that Ayot actually ate it, and one of them was leftover, meaning it was such a big piece of meat that it was leftovers for them. Right? Now again, here there was lions on the way to get him. You understand? It didn't say how many, but there were lions. So he says, Aite ve'atale ve'midrasha. So he went and he brought it to the Beit HaMidrash. So they asked, Davar tameh hu zeh, or is it tameh or ta'or? Amru le en davar tameh Yerushalayim. Says what? Something's going to come down Yerushalayim, which is going to be tameh. For sure, it's to be ta'or. So you see from here, though, that there's a proof that there's such a thing as basar hayored me'ashamayim, and it's mutar ba'achila. So that was mutar. That was mutar for them to eat. Another question. Says Rabbi Zira from Rabbi Yavu, Yardalo demut chamor. Right, really, be'emet, it was like a chamor that came down from Shemayim. Mau, what's halacha? Meaning, if be'emet it would have been basar, but it wouldn't have been of basar, because basically here was kosher meat. It was just yerechaim of basar. But what happens if mamash was a chamor? So now what, you're allowed to eat a chamor? We know you're not allowed to eat chamor. So what happens if this chamor came down from the Shemayim? Right? You see chamors all the time, but here's mamash coming down in the Shemayim. So he says, Elmaleh yarud nala. What does that mean? He says, Tanin shoteh. He says, Amruleh and davar tameh. How could it be a chamor? If you just told me that the yesod is that there's nothing which is going to be tameh, which comes down from the Shemayim, so obviously then we're talking about that it's not, it can't come down a chamor then. So what's your question then? Right? What are you coming from? So it says the Gemara, Shimon says, by the way, you should know that they're going to be chayav even on the kishuf, and the Gemara is going to explain, right, why exactly they're going to be chayavim on kishuf. Have a wonderful day.